Bonjour.
Ça va bien?
Très bien, merci.
Thank you for coming, everybody. You all know about the good news that we have today, and that's good news that I received at about 4:15 this morning, that a tentative agreement has been reached by negotiators on all sides. And if ratified, our schools will be reopened, teachers will be back teaching, and students will be back learning, which is fantastic news. Even more than that, though, in addition to that, we have also reached an historic 6-year agreement with teachers. This has never been done before in British Columbia's history. So that means that 5 years of labor peace ahead of us. And those are 5 years in which we can spend our time, rather than bargaining and being in a constant state as we have been for almost 30 years of moving from one bargaining session to the next year after year. We'll have 5 years in which we can sit and talk about the things that really matter, and that's improving education for children in classrooms and thinking about how we can improve that. A negotiated settlement was really important because it allows us to reset that relationship, which has been dysfunctional for so long. And resetting the relationship, it means that we can sit respectfully and talk respectfully about something that matters to both the government, to the teachers union, to classroom teachers, to parents, and to students, obviously. And that's improving learning outcomes for kids and making it work better for kids in the classroom. And so I want to thank everyone, because this is really a remarkable achievement after 30 years of dysfunction. I don't want to speak about it in a bunch of detail because trustees and teachers need to see it, and teachers, of course, need to vote on it. But I do want to acknowledge all those who made this breakthrough after 30 years possible. First and foremost, it was parents and students who had the patience to allow this dispute to finish in a negotiated settlement. And I know it was incredibly difficult, and it was a painful thing for so many families to have to endure this work stoppage. But because they gave us the space on both sides of the table, we were able to come to a negotiated settlement. It took time, and I know that was time. It was difficult for parents and families to provide, but they did, and that's what gave us the space. So I want to thank them for their patience to make sure that we could do this the right way. I'd like to thank the negotiators at the table, Vince Reddy as a mediator, and of course the negotiators on both sides of that table. Jim Eicher from the BCTF. This has been difficult. You know, it takes leadership on both sides. And Jim, in deciding to step forward and come to a negotiated agreement and step away from what was really a dysfunctional relationship and try and set something new, I think showed real courage in doing that. Peter Fassbender, our Minister of Education. I know it's been challenging across government, but for Peter Fassbender has really been carrying the burden of that on the government side of this negotiation. I want to thank you for that, Peter. You did a great job. Both of these two men, Peter and Jim Eicher, guided us through this negotiation, and I think a lot of you might have predicted that that wasn't possible, but you proved everybody wrong, both of you together. So we did find a way to give teachers a fair raise. We have improved investments in classroom composition, which was an absolute priority for me. Make sure that there's more teaching support in classrooms for kids. And we found a way to do that without raising taxes, and we found a way to do it without cutting services, and we found a way to do it without going into deficit. I really do want to just finish by saying I know all sides, both sides in this, worked really, really hard to get to an agreement. And I know the reason that everybody worked so hard was because we only have one thing on our minds, all of us, whatever side of the negotiating table that we were on. And that was making sure that we protected the best interests of students, and I think we did that. So now we'll wait for it to get to a vote, and we hope be ratified by members. If that's the case, our kids across the province could be back in school as early as Monday, which would be a great relief, I know. So thanks to everybody, all the parents and families out there who stuck with this, and thanks to the negotiators for working so hard and getting us here. It really is a good day for British Columbia, and I think it's a real it's a real game changer for education in the long term, because we will now be able to sit down with some of the most important people in the system, and that's teachers, and work together rather than constantly arguing and fighting, because we're always in negotiations. Work together to make sure that we're making classrooms better for kids. So thanks. Can I ask Peter Fassbender if he has anything to say first, and then we can get to questions.
Thank you, Premier, and I'm not going to repeat everything the Premier said, but I think one of the keys that I have felt through this morning when I got the call that there was a tentative agreement, very shortly after I phoned Jim Eicher and I said, you know, in negotiations there's always give and take. Both parties have to be willing to give and take, and I thanked him for the willingness on the part of the BCTF negotiating team and the executive to do that. And I said the key for me now is how do we move ahead and work together in partnership with parents and with other partners in the system to make our education system even better than what it is today. And we have one of the best in the world. We're going to build on that foundation by looking at what does composition really mean for the future, because that is a key for this government, always has been, and it was proven at the table by the work that was done by the negotiating team. So I've been very proud and humbled to be a part of this government that does understand those issues and wants to chart a future for our kids for now and generations to come, quite honestly, that is going to be built on a stable environment where we can really get the work done. So, Premier, thank you for your support throughout this as well, because it takes a team to do this. There is no one individual, it is everybody. And our leader has been a part of that process throughout by giving the team the ability to do what they did so well. So thank you.
So if we could look to me here for questions, as we always do, and let us know who your question is for, and we'll start right here.
John Woodward from CTV News. Taxpayers want to know, how much is this deal going to cost?
Well, I can say this. I can't get into too much detail before it's been presented to the members of the Teachers Federation. I mean, they need to be the first that see it, along with trustees. That's going to be a little bit later today, I think. But I can tell you this. It is within our fiscal plan. I said at the very beginning, this needs to be something that's affordable for taxpayers. So we've found a way to give teachers a fair raise, to improve classroom composition, to really make it work for teachers at the same time that we're making sure it still works for taxpayers. So we're not going to have to raise taxes, we aren't going to go into deficit, and we're not going to increase our debt.
We'll go to James at the back of the room there.
So it's James Keller with Canadian Press. How does this deal deal with the court case that's looming over all of this, and how do you ensure that when we get the result of that, either at the BC Court of Appeal or at the Supreme Court of Canada, that we're not back here in a year or two with more threats of strikes and those sorts of things? So how do you deal with that court case, which has been at the issue of all this in the first place?
I'll give you a really high-level answer on that, because again, I don't want to get too much into details in this hour. But we'll wait a little bit and we'll have a chance to have more conversation about it once members have had BCTF members have had a chance to see it. It's their agreement too, so they should be the first to have a look at it. But I'll say this, part of the agreement allows government to settle outstanding grievances. And so we've done that in the agreement. And so we've agreed that we'll settle the outstanding grievances that are there, and that's was, for both sides. That was a major step forward on both sides. But it was a key to making the decision, making the agreement work at the end of the day.
But just to be clear, though, this doesn't dispatch with the court case, though. I mean,
No, the court case is going to continue. Yeah.
Right here, Premier, on your right. Over here.
So you say that we don't get into the details right now into what goes to members. When is that actually going to members? Can we get a concrete time?
Well, I'm not sending it out. The BCTF is sending it out, but I think they'll be doing that today. So, but back to your point, though, James. Just so you're clear about that, there was a major liability predicted, potential liability to the education system. A financial liability, and we decided that it was worth settling that liability for a smaller number, ultimately, in setting aside those grievances in the context of this agreement. So that's what we did, and that's looking retrospectively looking backward.
On the floor here.
Mrs. Premier, let's go back to the court case, if you don't mind. this court case since 2002 have been a major disrupting factor in this dysfunctional relationship that you were talking about. Would the BC government be ready to accept the judgment that will come, or will you go to Supreme Court and we're back at it again to this dysfunctional relationship you were talking about a moment ago?
Well, you know, I think it's possible to disagree on some things and continue to have a functional relationship. That's true with other unions in the province as well. Sometimes while we're arguing over things in court, we've continued to talk about the things that are important to us. I can't predict what's going to happen with that, but I'll say we now have the space to talk productively. And boy, you know, I can't remember a time when government's really been able to do that. And that is so important for classroom teachers. And it is so important for students because it means we can sit down and talk about how we're going to transform education. How are we going to modernize it? How are we going to make sure that our kids have every chance they can to compete in the world? How are we going to make classrooms better for teachers to teach in? We don't get enough time to talk about those things when the relationship isn't functional. Now we've opened up the space to do that. Thanks to parents and people in British Columbia living through, I think, what was a difficult time for everybody and giving us the space to do it.
We're going to go to Marcella at the back of the room next.
Premier, concerns have been raised about who's been pressuring you to finally make the concessions that you had to make in order to get to this deal. Questions about the Chinese consulate putting their foot down and saying, if you don't do this, we're going to be pulling kids out of schools. Was there any pressure, or how much pressure did you feel to get this done from outside sources?
None. You know, the pressure that I felt was a pressure from everyone in British Columbia to do the right thing. And that was to get kids back in school. That was the pressure that we all felt. And on both sides of the table, because we needed to get kids back in school as quickly as we possibly could. And we always knew that the purpose of negotiations was to try and find some meeting in the middle, which is what we did. We found a meeting in the middle that respects the need for teachers to get a raise, to improve classroom composition for kids, and at the same time make sure that we're looking after the interests of taxpayers.
We're going to go to
Why not
Ted.
be closer together? Why not do it over the summer?
Well, negotiations happen as they happen. I mean, we can't always predict the ebb and flow of how it's going to work, but this is how we got to an agreement. I'm really glad we did.
Ted.
Premier, can I ask, so the teachers have got their settlement, the government's happy with its arrangement, but students all across the province are out a couple of weeks of education last spring and 3 weeks this fall. How are you going to make that up? Are you going to extend the school year? How are they ever going to get those 5 weeks back?
We're thinking about that now. I'll let our Minister of Education speak to that directly.
Very clearly, we've had discussions with superintendents and administrators throughout the province leading up to where we are today. They are working on plans, and we'll be announcing that as soon as the vote is ratified by both the teachers and the trustees. The bottom line is we have guaranteed that every student's educational journey in this school year will be kept whole. And especially true for grade 11 and 12 students. The details will be announced as we move forward. There are plans being put into place right now.
Mm-hmm.
So we have time for a couple more questions. We'll go here first.
Question for Minister Fassbender. Issue of 1701 forms. The schools say the deadline is supposed to be at September 30th for qualify for funding. Are you going to extend that deadline, or how are you going to address that?
Well, we've clearly said on everything, we recognize in a labor dispute lots of things get challenged, including some of the procedures we've had in the past, and we're going to make every accommodation with every school district to make sure that we respect the fact that they've had a lot on their plate. They've been dealing with a lot of pressure as well, so we're going to work with them. We have a great relationship with school districts and school boards, and we want that to continue as well.
Question here quickly.
Mr. Fassbender, who is going to be funding the teachers' wage increases? Will it be the ministry or will it be school boards?
Clearly, we made the commitment at the beginning of this that the increases are within our budget parameters, so it is the provincial government that is funding this particular settlement.
And why are you clawing back the 20% strike savings from districts for September?
Well, again, our team in the Ministry of Education is working with all the superintendents on what the real impact to them was. So we have said to them, just because we had a formula under a different set of circumstances, that won't necessarily apply. But again, we're doing that in a cooperative way, so the end result of those discussions hasn't been reached yet, because we just have a tentative agreement, so we know when the end date is probably going to be.
So that's all the time we have for right now, guys. Thanks
All
very
right.
much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Ouch.
It's got the abs.